Okay, it looks like we're good to get started already. Thank you all for joining in today for this SPSS workshop. I think most of you may have some experience or very, not so much experience using SPSS. So this particular workshop will serve as an introduction to the software if you've never used it before. So typically, SPSS is a software used to analyze any data that you might get when you're studying in the social sciences. So if you have a questionnaire or a survey that you've distributed to, your population, you might get their responses and analyze them statistically using SPSS. So if you are joining in online and you don't have SPSS installed on your computer, we've put in a link on the chat to a virtual desktop that you can log into if you're a TAMIU student. And from there, once you log in with your TAMIU credentials, you can get access to SPSS. After that, just log into your email, and also for those of you here in person, log into your email, and I sent you a link to a set that we're going to use within our workshop here. Okay, you guys come on in. Come on in, come on in. So please log on, open up SPSS, and if you did register online, check email so you can get access to our set of data so we can run that statistical analysis on it. For those of you on the chat, we also put in the link directly to the set that will open up on SPSS. I'll just give you guys a couple minutes to log in and get set up there. So the set I emailed you should have an extension called, or it should look something like this. The data file that's formatted as an SPSS, and the type is SPSS statistical data analysis document. Okay. So basically, the stuff that we're going to be looking at today was a questionnaire that was given to determine how somebody might lean politically, whether they're more conservative or more liberal, and the type of media they consume. And they were asked a bunch of questions on different types of media, such as the movies they watch, TV shows, or video games if they play any such video games. So we got a rather large data set of 100 different people that were surveyed, and we're now going to analyze to see if we find any correlations between this population and the types of media they consume with their political ideology. So it should be a fun set to take a look at. So if you have already downloaded the file, and if you are ready to open SPSS, go ahead and start the program, and you will be first greeted by this like a loading screen. Let's give it just a minute here. And this is version 29. I think this is the most up-to-date version of SPSS. So go ahead and start the program. Okay, so once you start the program, this is the screen that you will be greeted with. And as you can see, SPSS in large operates as two separate windows. And most of the time, you are going to see two separate windows. So just keep that in mind. As you're using this program, it's going to be operating in this way. So if you do close one window, just be sure you're not closing both of them because all of your data may be lost. So this is the statistical program. This back one, this larger one, might look a little bit familiar. Might look like Microsoft Excel if you've ever used it. And a lot of times when you get a large data set of different variables that you're analyzing, you will organize them in an Excel spreadsheet. So it kind of works in that way. However, this particular program is catered to specifically make it easy to run statistical analysis, unlike something like XPSL or even like RStudio. So to open a data set, if you already have one, you can click on New Dataset right here on the top left, click Open, and then right here, there's multiple ways to actually get the data set that you had just downloaded based on that link that was provided to you. You can click this folder icon that says open, or you can go to File, Open, and Data. So if you click File, Open, and Data, it'll give you an option to look for the particular file. So in this case, I think I left it under my downloads. So I'm gonna go to downloads and there it is as a .sav file. You are also able to upload any other file type. So let's say you did have an Excel file, you can upload an Excel file instead. You can do CSV, text, SAS, Stata, which are two other compatible statistical software, or you can just click on all files so everything comes out. In this particular case, like I said, the file that we are going to be using today is data file for Schreier and Ramarin. Sorry if I mispronounced that, because this is the one that has those survey results. Going to click open, and as you notice, it did open as a separate window. However, don't close the second one just yet, because that's where you have your data. So, just a second here. So right here, this is what your data looks like. Looks like an Excel spreadsheet, bunch of numbers, bunch of different variables. And let's kind of go over exactly what we're looking at here. So as you can notice on the bottom, you have a couple tabs here. You have your data tab and your variable tab. So the data tab is the exact, raw data that we collected. Each column here, if this was a questionnaire or a survey, each column is a question that was asked to the participant that's participating in your study. So if each one of these columns is a question, each row is then a different participant. So the first one looks like age. So then we have someone that was 18, 19, 24, 22, et cetera, et cetera. And if we scroll down on this page, it looks like we had how many respondents to this survey? We had 413 different folks that answered this survey on their political ideology and the types of content that they consume. So we also asked gender, sex orientation, the race, and there's this one variable that says poll. Wonder what poll means. And then we have another one that says VG1 name and VG cat name. What do these variables mean, right? How are these codes assigned to these variables? Well, we can actually look more detail on what these variables, being the top row, mean by clicking on variable view. If we click on variable view, then we get an exact breakdown as to what each variable is. So let's say for the first one, now the rows are the variables and the columns are the exact specific details on these variables. So we take a tour here on this variable view. The first one is age, and then right here as a label, we have a bit more details as to what question was asked. And let's say you're entering your information on SPSS, it's a good idea to put these labels on here. That way you have a better idea as to what questions were asked. So for the sex, they were asked, what was your biological sex at birth? For gender, with what gender do you identify? Sexual orientation, what is sexual orientation? And then for this VG1 name, it's what is the name of your first favorite game? VG1 cat name, what is the genre of your first favorite game? VG1 lock, where did you play this game most often? So this is just a breakdown of what those questions were. That way we're not just going based on these names and trying to figure it out for ourselves. So typically you would come up with these questions. So this is a good way to just stay organized. So now we understand, going back to this bottom section here, what these variables mean, right? And what each column means. And we have quite a few here, and we have some responses that aren't filled out, but that's okay. I will address that at some point during this presentation. But as you can see here, looking at this area, all these variables are coded as numbers, right? So this one, MRNI underscore AF7, that's coded as a number, but if we go there, MRNI FRE7, it's being a bit down in the dumps is not a good reason to act depressed. How is that a 1 to a 5, right? What do those 1 to a 5 mean? What do these specific numbers mean? So if you go to variable view, right here where we see the values, we can actually get a breakdown as to what those responses exactly mean. So for this one, where they're asking men should be detached emotionally, detached in emotionally charged situations, we can get a breakdown as to what the different options were for those that were taking the survey. So the first value, strongly disagree. The second value, disagree. The third value, somewhat disagree. Fourth, is neutral. 5, somewhat agree. 6, agree. 7, strongly agree. So there's a breakdown of all those different responses. So now you have a better idea as to what all these numbers mean. They're not exactly numbers, not all of them at least. There are a few of them that do actually mean the number that it's representing, like how old they are with their age. That number really means that same number. But these other ones are a bit more complicated because they work in a scale. And a scale in this particular case is a scale from 1 to 7, which brings me to the next column over here, where you can identify if it's a scale or if it's a nominal variable, which basically just means if it's in a category, or if it's in an ordinal variable, which means that it's a category, but it has that natural order to it. So let me see if I can find a ordinal. Okay, there's not exactly an ordinal in this data set, but I like to think of it as like a category for ordinal that doesn't necessarily mean those numbers that it represents, but it does have a natural order to it, like education. If somebody has a bachelor's, master's, or PhD, those are categories, not exactly numbers, but they have a natural order to them. So those are ordinal, but nominal is just pure categories. And then scales is whatever has that scale, and the scale can be as small as 1 and 2 in some cases. So if we look here for this column, on this column 11, what is the name of your first favorite game? That's a nominal variable because it is that category, because it's a category. So your favorite game isn't necessarily better in any way than someone else's favorite game because it's subjective. It's like asking people for their name. Really, it's nominal. It's going to depend. And there's no natural order to which game it is. So the genre, again, there's no genre that's superior to another one, at least not objectively. What is the name of your second favorite game? Also nominal. name of your third favorite game, also nominal, your favorite TV show, the name of your second favorite TV show, and the name of your third favorite TV show. These are nominal. But as you can see, the majority of them are scales. So whoever made this survey really wanted to run some fancy statistics with this, which we'll talk about here. So there's one tab I have yet to talk about. So far we talked about the data tab, which shows the raw data, all the responses, the variable tab, which shows all the variables, meaning the questions we asked. So each question is a variable. And now there's a total overview of the entire data set. So we have 111 variables, or you can think of them as questions, 413 cases, or you can think of those as participants or the people who responded to your survey. We have 91.9% of them as scale variables and 8.1 of them as nominal. Okay, hope everyone is still following along. We're still in the easy part. Yes, what's up? What's the question?
They put the race ethnicity question as a scale.
I'm not exactly sure, but that seems like one that should be changed, actually. Good catch. So then race, oops, did I change this? Yes, so race in that case should be a nominal scale. You're right. And then sexual orientation would probably also change that one. Gender as well, and anything else you might think has that nominal specification. And for age, that does have a natural order, so that might be ordinal in that case. Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so now that ideally, if we had more time, we could go through every single one of these. But since this is only an hour long and an intro to this software, let's move on here. So let's run some basic statistics on this. Let's just understand what each one of these variables is, right? So in order to analyze one variable, we can look at its descriptive statistics. So in order to start analyzing, we go to this tab here where it says Analyze on the top. And we go to Descriptive Statistics, and we can click on Descriptives. Okay, is everyone here on this page already? Good. Give me just a second here. Okay, so descriptive statistics. Now we can move a variable over. So pick whichever one you like so we can analyze. In this case, I think I'm going to pick, let's see, what's a good one? I guess with what gender do you identify? Let's look at that variable here, which is a nominal one. Press OK, and it gives you a total. So the options here, I believe, were 1, 3, 1 for male. Well, let's see here. We go to gender, the different values that are here: 1 male, 2 female, and 3 transgender. So if we go back to the other page, like I said, SPSS works in multiple different windows. Looks like the minimum here would be the amount of times that it's 1, 2. The average is 1.5. Makes sense. Everyone's, so it seems like it's a pretty even distribution between men and women. But let's see exactly how many men and women and transgender that we have for that specific data set. So this is telling us something, but since those numbers are nominal, it doesn't really tell us too much. So if we go back to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and we hit for frequencies, now it'll tell us the different frequencies that we have here. Is this the one? Let's do 2 of them, just to show that you can do multiple variables here. Press OK. And now we have a breakdown of exactly who falls under, or rather what responses we got from our data set. So when we looked at sexual orientation, looks like we have 89%, which is 369 folks that were straight or heterosexual. Those that answered gay or lesbian, 3.4%, bisexual, 6.3%, anything else, 1%. And then it has a cumulative score or percentage here, a valid percent, which is the true percentage, and then the total frequency here. So typically this is something that you would want to, show if you're writing a paper or doing a presentation on what that specific variable is for your total population. So over here, we have another one. Before we begin, please give your age in the amount of years. So it looks like here we got a breakdown of the exact ages of the people who participated in this study. So the percentage, looks like the most popular percentage here at 12.6 was 20, but it seems like there's somewhat of an even distribution. Oh, actually, the most popular was 14% at 24 years old, which has 58 participants. So that's a good way to actually tell exactly what your variable is telling you. Well, let's say you don't like these tables, you don't like these figures, you would prefer a chart instead. SPSS can also give you a chart. If you go back to analyze, descriptive statistics, go back to frequencies, choose those. They have another option here for charts. So let's say a bar chart is something I want to use. You can also use pie chart if you prefer pie chart, or a histogram, which is kind of fun. So now it's going to generate a chart. We press OK. So sexual orientation, right here we have 1, which is the heterosexuals, and 2, 3, 4, those responses. Before we begin, please give your age, and this is kind of a good representation as to how the ages are evenly distributed based on the options, or rather based on what was their sample population. So that's how we can get those specific charts or histograms on SPSS for one particular variable. There's also some other really basic statistics you can run based on those one variables. Going back to analyze, descriptive statistics, go back to frequencies, choose your variables. There's another tab here that says statistics. So here, let's say you wanted to know the average age, you would go to mean, and if you want to know the median, mode, you can click all those if you'd like. Include the percentiles, let's say standard deviation if we want. You put any of these. Well, maybe not percentile because I don't want to bother with that. Maybe a standard error, minimum or maximum. You can click as many or as few of these as you want, but I like to stick with those. Press OK. And now it'll give us the mean, the average, standard deviation, and the total responses there. So I have it here. 1 second. Let me just see here, back with frequencies. I think it's because I'm choosing charts. It's not generating that table with all of these. Okay. %. Oh, here it is. And then those statistics comes out. So it has the mean for what is your sexual orientation and for the age of the participants. So the average age is 21 and a half years old. The median age is 22 and the mode is 24 with a standard deviation of 2 years. And for this one, 0.581. So, depending on what exactly you want to look for in your data set is going to determine what analysis that you choose. Okay, so again, this was all just to analyze one particular variable in your data set. Okay, does anyone have any questions before we move on? It's pretty easy, right? Less intimidating maybe. So this is just like a specific window where all of our output is going to be. But the rest of SPSS is still housed on these other separate windows. So we still got this one where it has your full data, with your variable view, full data, and your overview. Okay. Just a second here. Where's my... Okay, so let's say you're doing an analysis here on the question that asked, what is, let's see if it's here somewhere. I'm looking for a particular variable. Right here, poll, what is your political orientation? So let's say I have all of these different options, you know, very liberal, liberal, slightly liberal, moderate, slightly conservative, conservative, very conservative. And I decide that's a bit too many options. I really just want to know, are you conservative or not? Or are you liberal? So I want to transform these 7 options into 3 options, but it's already there. If you run into something like this and you want to do what's known as a transformation to transform your variables, there's a transform tab right up here. You go to transform and you can recode your different variables. From there, I'm going to choose a new variable. I'm just going to extend this so I can see a little better. So I'm going to choose what is your political orientation, move that over. So now, let's say the name here is going to be a new code. So now it's poll underscore recode. Let's say recode. I want to change it. And the new label is going to be recoded political ideology. Right? And then we want to change this code here. So we go to all the new values. So now we have the value here. So now the new value for number 1 that's going to be changed, we can use the same values here. So right here, system missing values. 1 second here, system missing values, add old. Let's see, can we do this value 1? Okay, so now the value of 1 is still going to equal 1. The old value of 2 is also going to equal like a number 1. So now 1 and 2 equal to 1. The value of 3, I also want as 1. So I know that you're liberal or not. Oops. So the value of 3 is now 1. Add that. If they're like neutral, say I want to keep that response as neutral. So 4 is going to be now coded as 2. Now we have the ones that are conservative. So 5 is now coded as 3. 6 is now coded as 3. And number 7 is coded as 3. So now we got all of our recoded examples and we can hit continue. And now it's going to be recoded as a new column as poll underscore recode in our particular case. Press OK. It should have appeared, might still be processing. Processor is ready. So another should be there now. Now pull. Yeah, so now it's right there as our 112th different variable here. And if we look at the values, should be there. We can add a value here so we can identify what our new values are going to be. So the value of 1 is now a liberal. Value of 2 is a moderate. And the value of 3 is conservative. So now I can use this new one here instead of the old ones, just so I know based on that binary. Sorry, that binary, if they're conservative or not, or if they're moderate. So now, if I do an analysis here, and we look at the descriptive statistics and the frequencies, let's move these back because I don't need them. And now if I want to look at their political orientation here with the first one I used and then the coded one again, press OK. Now we have these two different ones. This one has seven different options. This second recoded one just has those 3 different options. So it looks like the people that answered this particular survey were, in the most part, 46% were moderate if you group certain sections together. So that's how you can transform your variables depending on the questions that you wanted to ask. So this feature can be pretty useful, especially if you had already developed some code and you maybe want to transform what the variables were. Just a second. Okay, so now we can talk about transforming the other types of variables. They're not nominal. Now we can actually compare 2 different variables with each other. So typically these are scale variables that we might want to compare with each other so we can run through these different statistics. The first one I like to do is an independent t-test, which is a common statistical analysis that you'll run on different variables. So in order to find a t-test, which you might have heard of but are not too familiar where to find on SPSS, you can go to Analyze. There's a tab here for Compare Means and Proportions. And then we can do what's known as an independent samples t-test. So let's say I want to compare or run a t-test on gender. So what I do is I group gender with some other variables. So I group gender and then I define these different groups as 1 and 2. Put continue. And now we can compare it with a test variable. In this case, I want to know how many video games you've played. So see if I can find it here. How many hours of video games do you play on Monday? Or no, let's do the end of the week. On Friday, how many video games do you play on Friday? And we're going to separate them by the gender that they put as their response. So now we can generate this sort of statistic up here where it separates them. Looks like the N total respondents for male 203, for female 208, or at least the ones that answered that, with the mean, the average. So the average amounts for men is 3.34 hours. For women, it's 0.9 hours. So based on this, just doing an eye test, we can see that men on average spend quite a bit longer playing video games on a Friday night. I'm sure you're not surprised, but in order to prove this statistically, we run what's known as a t-test to determine its significance. So, this might be useful for something less obvious than this, but essentially what you're looking for is the significance level. So the one-sided P, which is that significance, and the two-sided P. And anything that's like less than 0.05 to 0.00 is considered statistically significant, meaning there is this sort of correlation that we're seeing when we look at the different genders and playing video games. So if you wanted to run some other statistic and prove whether or not it's more often that one particular variable behaves in a certain way or answers in a certain way and how it might affect another variable, an independent t-test is a good way to go. But sometimes you want to just compare different averages, on a more advanced way to group things in a more complex way where you compare these means still. In this case, you would want to do an ANOVA or an analysis of variance to know how much one variable, how much it varies in its average. So to do an ANOVA or an analysis of variance, we go to Analyze, compare means and proportions. Oops, sorry. Analyze, compare means and proportions, and then we do a one-way ANOVA right here. And then it's also like the other section, might have been easier, where we get to choose a variable and put them as our dependent variable or a factor. So in this case, let's say I want to compare someone's political ideology, mostly because I know where that one is, since we recoded that as something else. And I want to compare that with what they answered when they were asked to agree or disagree on the statement if boys should play with action figures and not dolls. Where is it? Boys should play with action figures and not dolls. Is there something there based on their political ideology? Do they think maybe they should be playing with action figures instead of dolls? Let's see. So we go to options just to give us a little bit more of an idea. And we select, let's say, descriptives, which gives us a better idea on what these variables are independently of each other. Make sure that for yours it does say exclude cases of analysis by analysis. Click continue, and then we click OK. So now we got our one-way ANOVA. As you can see, it gives us the average response here. So I believe for this one, the lower the score, the less they agreed. To double check that again, you go back to your variable view. You look for that question. Boys should play with action figures and not dolls. Right here. Yeah, it looks like strongly disagree was 1, and then strongly agree was 7. So the higher the score, the more they agree with that statement. So let's open up that other window there. So the average for a liberal was to say that they strongly disagree with that statement. The average response for a conservative is to say they strongly agree with that statement. Remember, the mean is that average. So you're comparing averages with each other, which is essentially what that one-way ANOVA will show you. And then it shows you, again, a significance level over here. Remember, the lower that number is, the more statistically significant it is. So although you can say the averages are there, when you're running a specific statistical analysis, it just makes your argument even that much more stronger, because this creates a prediction. This number specifically allows you to make that prediction. If someone's more conservative, they are going to be more likely to answer that they agree with that statement, which these averages don't exactly tell you. It just shows you the averages. Sound good? Is everyone following along still? You have any questions? You're talking about the
It says between groups and
between groups, the ANOVA. You know, for this one, I really just look at these significance levels for these. Looks like the sum of these squares, I guess, for all of the responses. I don't think it holds as much weight as, you know, the total output here. Yeah. So I would just focus on these here. Looks like what they do is they multiply the total amount of respondents here, because this will add up to that 413. Yeah, sorry, but the typical output there should be that sort of significance level. But let's say you want to analyze a whole bunch of variables at the same time. So if you do what's known as a cross tabulation, you can cross-reference a bunch of different variables in one convenient table. So this isn't exactly something you can generate in a chart. So to generate a cross tabulation, or a cross tab, if you will, you go to Analyze, Descriptives, and go to Crosstabs. So here you can choose exactly the rows and the columns of your variables and compare as many or as few as you'd like. So let's say we want to do someone's political ideology as a row, and I have a feeling that might be correlated with their sexual orientation. Just as a hunch. You can also do any sort of analysis you want. Click statistics, and with this particular crosstab, you can actually run a different set of statistics based on what your analysis calls for. So if you're basing your statistical analysis on previous research, typically you would go with, you know, how it's previously been analyzed, you know, and then adapt it. So you know, SPSS makes it easy because you can just kind of look for the specific analysis within that software. At least it makes it easier than, let's say, Excel would make it. So in this case, I'm going to click chi-square as our additional statistical analysis. We can also format the exact cells that we're looking at. Let's say that I want to also have a column with percentages, because I want those extra, you know, figures on there. Click continue, and we press OK. And now we have this cross tab where we chose the rows, which is like liberal, moderate, conservative, and we compare that with their sexual orientation. And it kind of generates this matrix of different variables with its percentages. So the amount of liberals that are straight seems to be 112 that responded to that survey, which is the majority here. And for conservatives, looks like we have 78, but it looks like overall there was more folks that were, you know, that answered as a liberal. So this is where I think the percentages might come more in handy when you have these skewed results of a particular demographic. So it looks like the percentages here for the liberals, they seem to have a higher percentage that are straight and heterosexual. Gay and lesbian looks like they have an even higher percentage as well. Bisexual looks like the liberals are also a higher percentage overall. Total counts are also listed down here. And it gives you a Pearson chi-square if that is what your previous research told you to look for that, you know, particular analysis. Okay, let's do one more type. Let's see, do we have time? It's getting pretty close. Okay, well, so this is basically all of our output. You know, depending on what your research paper calls for, these are going to be the ones that you want to use. If you want to navigate this area better, you could also click this sidebar and it'll highlight the specific ones you want, or maybe the ones you don't. Like, let's say you only want to keep this last part, you can choose any of these to erase by clicking delete, and it'll highlight them, and you press delete, and it gets rid of those. But let's say I'm working on a paper, and I want to use this chart in a paper. Let's say on Microsoft Word, and I want to export these. SPSS makes it as easy as copying and pasting this onto a Word document. Let's say my paper's here and I want to copy this chart. You can copy as an image, a Microsoft Office graphics object, or an EMF. I'm going to choose Microsoft Office because when I paste it on here, it will allow me to edit these values. So instead of it being 1 or 2, we can actually put the sexual orientation. I mean, you could also put the specific, like a key in there to represent text option. Anyway. No, format access. No. Strange. Let's see here. Guess we can create a legend here. Well, I know that there is a way to edit, but for time's sake, I also want to show that you can also copy these charts here too, and those should be editable as well. So when you're on here, these might cross over. You can adjust them as necessary to make it look nice for your paper. And type it with the rest of your results if necessary. And ideally, this would have a brief explanation as to, what this particular chart is here on the bottom. So that is the intro to SPSS. I trust that was a good set of, statistics to help you get started on your data set. If you've collected anything, I will stick around a bit longer in case you guys have any specific questions that you want answered. But other than that, that concludes today's presentation. Thank you guys for coming.